Welcome back to some more Mystery Book. We are now Chapter 4, Part 3. So, let's see. Basically, left off of some quotes from Yuval. What's his name? Harari? No, not Yuval Noah Harari. And how Klaus Schwab favors him and all that good stuff. Okay, so let's continue. Another example of how Schwab and his globalist allies try to pit both sides against each other comes in the next section on governments and business. In this section, he tries to sound like a conservative. For all reasons expanded upon in the first chapter, COVID-19 has rewritten many of the rules of the game between the public and private sectors. In the post-pandemic era, business will be subject to much greater governmental interference than in the past. The benevolent or otherwise greater intrusion of governments in the life of companies and the conduct of their business will be country and industry dependent, therefore taking many different guises. This might strike you as the initial setup of a conservative speaker, but it's not. This is the opening gambit of a fascist. Sure, Schwab wants to use the government for a while to achieve his aims, but then toss it overboard when his corporate buddies can fully implement their plans. And right on cue, Schwab comes up with his new idea, stakeholder capitalism. It will sound like he wants to be more democratic. He doesn't. It's just a trick to get more power into the hands of his buddies. The pandemic struck at a time when many different issues ranging from climate change activism and rising inequalities to gender diversity and the Pound Me Too scandals had already begun to raise awareness and heighten the criticality of stakeholder capitalism and ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations in today's interdependent world. Whether espoused openly or not, nobody can deny that companies' fundamental purpose can no longer be simply the unbridled pursuit of financial profit. It is now incumbent upon them to serve all their stakeholders, not only those who hold shares. Remember when I said that the globalists will use any issue to promote their plans? There's COVID-19, climate change, inequality, gender diversity, and now the Pound Me Too movement. All part of the globalist plan to create maximum chaos and fear, the better to implement their authoritarian agenda. The issue really doesn't matter because the answer is always the same: globalism. In the world of the globalists, the pattern is always the same. The individual must be overruled by the power of the group, inevitably led by Schwab and his buddies. This is from a section of Schwab's COVID-19 book on the need for everybody to undergo an individual reset. Psychologists tell us that cognitive closure often calls for black and white thinking and simplistic solutions. A terrain propitious for conspiracy theorists and the propagation of rumors, fake news, mistruths, and other pernicious ideas. Okay. In such a context, we look for leadership, authority, and clarity, meaning that the question as to whom to trust within our immediate community and among our leaders becomes critical. In consequence, so too does the countervailing issue of whom we distrust. For all their supposed brilliance, it's remarkable how little these globalists seem to want to engage in any type of intellectual debate. They simply want to prevent any debate from happening at all. The only question seems to be, who has the authority to speak? After that, we're supposed to believe the words that spill from the mouth as if we were listening to the voice of God. When one is starting a relationship with a domestic abuser, the behavior can look much different from when one is deep into the relationship. People do not get into abusive relationships because they want to be harmed. It's because they're persuaded, manipulated. It's like Stockholm Syndrome. The new person is charming, attentive, passionate, all things that may have seemed to be missing from the other person's life at the time. But once the relationship is set, once there is some sort of commitment, the abuse can begin, but little by little, showing the true colors. The abusive acts will not be seen as common, but as an anomaly. Oh, that happened because he hadn't got much sleep the night before. Or, that fight wouldn't have happened if that other guy hadn't been checking me out. However, the actions tell you the truth. This is Schwab being persuasive to you, hoping you'll join with him. And it's like the frog in boiling water. This is the same concept, right? It's like, oh, this is not too bad. Oh, it feels kind of nice. Okay. Then over time, it's like, oh, I'm nice and comfortable here. And then you just get stuck in that space. Anyways, so this is Schwab being persuasive to you, hoping you'll join with him. So now it's going back to the words of Schwab. The deep crisis provoked by the pandemic has given us plenty of opportunities to reflect on how our economies and societies work and the ways in which they don't. The verdict seems clear. We need to change. We should change, but can we? Will we learn from the mistakes in the past? Will the pandemic open the door to a better future? Will we get our global house in order? Simply put, will we put into motion the Great Reset? What is Schwab giving us other than a call to action with no substance behind it? It sounds warm and cozy, and yet it's maddeningly vague. At least when the television preachers give you such a pitch, they helpfully give you a phone number to call so you can pledge your money. But you need to be aware of how Schwab plans to get to that good place. I don't want you to forget for a second the line in which he wrote, "No extreme scenario can now be taken off the table." With that quote fresh in your mind, I want you to consider the following passage from the conclusion of COVID-19, the Great Reset. The absolute prerequisite for a proper reset is greater collaboration and cooperation within and between countries. Cooperation, a supremely human cognitive ability that put our species on its unique and extraordinary trajectory, can be summed up as a shared intentionality to act together towards a common goal. We simply cannot progress without it. When I read that passage, I'm filled with fear. This is the key. They want your cooperation, just like the vampire legend needs an invitation to cross the threshold of your house. The globalists want you to invite them into your lives. The globalists keep focusing on the words collaboration and cooperation because they don't want you to think about those who raise questions, the dissidents. The globalists don't like individuals or individual accomplishments because they prevent them from taking control behind a facade of all the people want this outcome. Just think back to your high school years and what the adults told you about avoiding peer pressure to engage in activities that might be harmful to yourself or others, like drag racing down the street at 120 miles per hour. Sure, you might have succumbed a few times to the peer pressure, but your older and wiser self asks, how the hell did I survive till adulthood? That's probably why the wildest kids turn into the strictest parents, because they know how easy it is to do stupid things. This is what Schwab wrote on the last page of his COVID-19 book, to make sure that if you disagree with him, you realize you're not one of the cool kids at school. Hold on. These expressions of individual hope are supported by a multitude of surveys concluding that we collectively desire change. They range from a poll in the UK showing that a majority of people want to fundamentally alter the economy as it recovers, in contrast to 1/4 wanting it to return to how it was, to international surveys finding that a large majority of citizens around the world want the economic recovery from the coronavirus to prioritize climate change and to support a green recovery. Worldwide movements demanding a better future and calling for a shift to an economic system that prioritizes our collective well-being over mere GDP growth are proliferating. Do you get it? Everybody is demanding a better world. Get with the program. You don't want to be left behind. You might be forced to eat your lunch all by yourself in the high school cafeteria if you do. But you know, that's never how it goes when the uptight know-it-alls try to run a school. That's because you've got to the stoners, the carheads, and the jocks, and they can't stand the brown-noser student council perfect kids who cry if they don't get 100% on every test. It's why the globalists are going after the disruptive people like Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, or Elon Musk. They can't stand anybody making fun of them. If that happens, Klaus Schwab and his goons, under the rubric of no extreme scenario can now be taken off the table, are likely to take you behind the gymnasium and beat the hell out of you, or even worse. Did you think the easing of the COVID-19 crisis would lessen the maniacal plans of the globalists? The World Economic Forum at Davos was canceled in 2021 and held virtually in January 2022. But they decided by May 2022 that it was safe for them to once again meet in person. This is how it was depicted in the media. The WEF 2022 is meeting in springtime rather than January, when it is traditionally held, for the first time having been postponed on multiple occasions by COVID-19. Besides the novelty that the change of season brings, the WEF is meeting at a crucial time. In its 50-year history, the WEF has never been confronted with such unprecedented global issues as it now faces in 2022, as the world recovers from a global pandemic, grapples to contain the devastating impact of the climate crisis, and navigates a geopolitical storm following the invasion of Ukraine. For the globalists, it's always 5 seconds to midnight on the doomsday clock. And they're the only ones who can save us, apparently. If you're wondering what might transpire at a typical meeting of the World Economic Forum at Davos, let's look at what happened in 2022. On May 18th, Klaus Schwab held a talk with eager journalists who wanted to know what was going to be on the agenda for the globalists. In a world which is becoming more fragmented, more divided, and where many of the traditional multilateral organizations tend to become dysfunctional or at least mistrustful, a global platform based on informal, trust-based, and action-oriented cooperation will be ever more relevant, more important than before, Schwab declared. More than 50 heads of state and government will attend the meeting next week, including NATO, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, the WEF lists. Schwab may have wanted to present a warm and welcoming appearance to the rest of the world, but he wasted little time in letting people know that if they didn't behave, he was ready to use an iron fist. Schwab warned anyone who sought to trivialize the event or hijack its key messages, including the often mentioned Great Reset, will be treated with contempt. Contrary voices will simply not be tolerated. The atmosphere in which Davos takes place will be welcoming, but it is also of utmost seriousness, he confided. So there's no place for the frivolous fringe that seeks to distract and divert attention, and I condemn it wholeheartedly, particularly of those who have nothing to do with the World Economic Forum community and just come to Davos to hijack our brand. It's a little disheartening to realize that more than 50 heads of state as well as many more high government officials and heads of industry, attended an event that is so hostile to free speech. But Davos 2022 wasn't going to limit its disapproval of free speech to comments by their fearless leader. Many of the participants seemed eager to follow Schwab's anti-free speech agenda, such as Australia's e-safety commissioner, Julie Inman Grant. Speaking to the WEF panel on Monday, Commissioner Julie Inman Grant spoke of the need to rethink various rights, including the right to free speech. We are finding ourselves in a place where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything feels binary when it doesn't need to be, Inman Grant said. So I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, from the freedom of speech to being free from online violence, being free from online violence, she added. The current Australian government seems to be committed to a recalibration of free speech. That is a truly terrifying idea, as we know what it means. And we know it means they will seek to ban or limit any speech that affects their political power. There can be little question that this is exactly what they are seeking. If one wonders if this is the actual plan, one need only consider what happened to journalist Jack Posobiec, probably one of the most effective and popular of the Davos critics. Heavily armed Swiss officers appearing from the Ordnungstiant, I have no idea how to pronounce that, police force, allegedly frisked and detained Human Events Daily host and Turning Point USA contributor Jack Posobiec on Monday afternoon. The officers, who also told independent journalist Savannah Hernandez not to film them, claimed they have a right not to be filmed in Switzerland, despite there not appearing to be a federal law prohibiting people from filming police. This is typical for the globalists, who don't seem to let a little thing like the lack of a law prevent them from, who don't seem to let a little thing like the lack of a law prevent them from exercising their will. They apparently exist above any national laws. If you want a more authoritative take, one only had to wait for the talk by Susan Wojcicki, Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube. Oh, now owned by Google. The article from Fortune magazine opened with this. It's a precarious time for tech CEOs whose businesses have to juggle misinformation, free speech, and demands from employees to take a stand on global and domestic issues. For YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki, those responsibilities come on top of her efforts to grow the company with new competitors vying for screen time, the war in Ukraine, and an economic downturn that many predict will become a recession. For Susan Wojcicki, it can be so difficult to be a master of the universe when the peasants don't appreciate what you're doing. Helpfully, Wojcicki tries to explain her thinking to the crowd at Davos and the barbarians beyond the gates. There are a number of different ways we can look at this, she said. The first would be from a policy standpoint. We would look at content that we would think about in terms of being violative of our policies. If you look at COVID, she suggested, YouTube came up with 10 different policies that the platform said would be deemed violating, like saying that COVID came from something other than a virus. Wojcicki said YouTube did see people attacking 5G equipment because they thought it was causing COVID. That would be an example of content that would be removed. The second viewpoint, she continued, would be raising up authoritative information. If you are dealing with a sensitive subject like news, health, science, we are going to make sure that what we're recommending is coming from a trusted, well-known publisher that can be reliable. It is genuinely remarkable that in this day and age, where we have the best educated populace in our history, these big tech companies believe they must resort to such censorship. The old understanding that good ideas will win over bad ideas in the marketplace of thought has been replaced by a mistrust of robust debate. The new answer seems to be to trust the experts. Trust the experts, even if they're the ones who might have caused the problem or are profiting from the crisis. Besides, destroying the centuries-old practice of free speech and empowering dictators to control information, there were new innovations introduced at Davos, like your own personal carbon footprint tracker. Oh yeah, that one, carbon footprint tracker. Brought to you by the enlightened communist masters of China. Speaking at a strategic outlook, responsible consumption. WEF panel in Davos. Alibaba Group President J. Michael Evans said that his company will be introducing more surveillance systems within China in order to usher in a so-called greener future. Oh yeah, because you need more surveillance systems to help keep things green, right? I thought that would just trash the place more. If you want greener, if you want more natural, doesn't that mean that you have less of that around? So it doesn't make any sense, does it? We are developing through technology the ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint, where they are traveling, how they are traveling, what they are eating, what they are consuming on the platform, Evans said. Evans did not disclose if the data would be shared with the government. However, like with all Chinese corporations, Alibaba is beholden by law to provide data to the CCP, of course, as it was reportedly pressured to do so in January of last year. Imagine that. China has another way to surveil its citizens. As we have already discussed, China has been the experimental lab of the globalists for decades. How long will it be before Democrats in the United States will be calling for all of us to have these trackers? Well, not just Democrats. I think all aisles could be aiding in this. Like, labels are important, but I think that there's definitely a lot of establishment Republicans as well. Establishment libertarians, establishment Green Party, establishment. There's all people, they pose, okay? People can pose and put on a facade. The labels are just good for giving context on something, but no one is immune to falling or becoming a part of these problems. Just want to say that. I imagine it won't be long, maybe 2 or 3 years. But while you may find yourself interested in the attack of free speech or surveillance of your carbon footprint, you might be saying to yourself, I wonder what George Soros is doing these days. You know what? I always wonder that too. Well, even though he is 91 years old, he decided to show up at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2022 to give his thoughts. Billionaire George Soros warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine had rattled Europe and could be the start of another world war. Other issues that concern all of humanity, fighting pandemics and climate change, avoiding nuclear war, maintaining global institutions, have had to take a back seat to that struggle. Soros, 91, said Tuesday at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and that's why I say our civilization may not survive. Well, you can take a flying fuck, Soros. Isn't it good to know that if you or I pretentiously say civilization may not survive, the media will attack us as calling for our listeners to stage an insurrection? But if you're George Soros and have billions of dollars, when you say the exact same thing, you're treated as a wise sage. Yeah. However, predictions by Soros are often so wrong that one might be tempted to bet against anything he says. In 2020, this was what Soros was warning. Soros has previously used the WEF stage to unleash blistering critiques. At the last meeting in January 2020, he suggested without evidence that Facebook and company might be conspiring to help re-elect Donald Trump, who lost the US presidency later that year. Well, yeah, he was obviously wrong with that. If that's what Soros was complaining about in 2020, I'm likely to believe that civilization has a very bright future. I'll listen to Soros and immediately translate it into the opposite. And what globalist meeting wouldn't be complete without Bill Gates talking about vaccines? A partnership between U.S. drug maker Pfizer and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to speed up the development of vaccines to prevent diseases that cause newborn mortality would also advance efforts to make a high-tech malaria vaccine, Bill Gates said at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Wednesday. Pfizer and the foundation will also work with Rwanda, Malawi, and other African countries to increase access to all of the company's medicines and vaccines for their populations. We have a dream for beating malaria, and we'll talk to the great mRNA companies, including Pfizer, about this. We could use that mRNA platform to make a really powerful malaria vaccine, Mr. Gates said. Yes, Bill Gates loves his vaccines, doesn't he? And he is an enthusiastic participant at the World Economic Forum, where he gets to rub shoulders with the other rich and powerful people of the world. It would be so much easier not to call Klaus Schwab and his assorted friends around the world an evil globalist cabal trying to change humanity if they stopped acting like one. But it appears they can't help telling people exactly what they are. This is how Schwab's opening address to the World Economic Forum on May 23, 2022 was reported. On the evidence delivered on day one at the famous Swiss ski resort, Schwab very much sees his organization at the forefront of shaping the world of tomorrow. Unfortunately, outsiders have not been consulted or invited to join the 2,500 people flown in from all around the world to be present. Schwab was quick to praise those gathered before him in his welcoming address. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community, as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the state of the world. This is the game that Klaus Schwab and his cronies play. They don't want you to criticize their plans, but then they go around bragging about their plans to change the world and their strength. But remember what they say about those who stand in their way. No extreme scenario can now be taken off the table. It is time for us to finally see the globalists for who they are and what they want to do behind all their smoke and mirror tricks. And that is the end of chapter 4. So next time we will read chapter 5. And chapter 5 is called Yuval Noah Harari, RoboCop for the Empire.